Hi, I'm Greg Ruszkowski, and this is Faisal Valley. I'm here from Brown-Forman to talk to you about our new bourbon, Coopers Craft, the first new bourbon launched by Brown-Forman in over 20 years. It pays homage to the cooperage where whiskey barrels are made, and you can see on the bottle basically the 402 McLean. That's where the cooperage is. So it's a real light summer whiskey. It's only 80 proof, 82.2 proof, so it's a little lighter than some of our other whiskeys. Brown-Forman is probably more known for Jack Daniels or Woodford Reserve or even our Old Forester with whiskeys. So we've been making whiskey at Brown-Forman for over 150 years. We've been making barrels for over 70 years. So this is a way for us to pay homage to the craftsmanship that goes into the barrels. For those of you who don't know, bourbon gets all its color from the barrel and over half of its flavor from the barrel. So it's a very important ingredient. And Brown-Forman has over 600 employees that are involved from bark to bottle in producing this spirit. So with that, I'll turn it over to Faisal, who's going to talk about a cocktail made with this Coopers Craft.
Yeah. Okay, so the cocktail I'm making is going to be a variation of a sour. It's going to be a Gold Rush. So because the whiskey itself is pretty easy drinking, you know, it's not got too much heat on it, not too much wood, it plays well with stuff like this, especially something like peach, which is what's going in there. So I'm also going to be using egg white. You know, we do that sometimes to give it a little bit of a froth, a pretty little foam on top, and get the flavor out there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Something I'm not terribly good at, but today I am. Okay. And then next we'll go ahead and use the Coopers Craft. The spirit I'm using to modify it is something called Pêche de Vigne. It's a very subtle little peach liqueur. You probably are familiar with peach schnapps. That's a little bit too sweet. Next, we're going to use a bit of fresh lemon juice, of course, because it's a sour. And then our last ingredient is something local from a place called We Three Beaks. That's honey from Avondale. Our good friend Kerry Norton actually runs that, and you may know him because he's a photographer. And we're going to use it as a syrup, so we're going to dilute that 1-to-1 between the honey and some water. And because it's got the egg white, we're going to go ahead and give it what we call a dry shake. So you can seal it up without any of that ice. Give it a nice, good shake. And then you do something called a wet shake. That's going to be where you add the ice, and then you do the shake that you're probably used to. What you're going to see, it's going to give it a nice, dense foam. I'm going to double strain it so we can get rid of some of those ice chunks that are in there. Okay. And this is a little bit of rosemary grown down at Jones Valley Urban Farm. And that is the Cooper Gold Rush.
We have a couple questions about egg whites in cocktails and
okay.
why would
a very pretty foam that it gives it a texture, and a lot like your beer where it has that head on the end of it. A lot of what's there is some of the flavor that's coming out of that beer, and because you're partly drinking with your nose, it gives you a chance to sort of smell it first before you actually taste it, and it adds to the flavor.
And why are whiskey and citrus flavors used together so much in cocktails?
I think because they pair really well. I mean, I think, you know, cocktails tend to have a lengthener with it, and that's something sort of like that dilutes some of the spirit, makes it a little bit more palatable, you know? And I think that gives it a broader appeal, you know, when you can make it a little bit smoother.
And I think Chris Morris, who's the master distiller, one of the things he was looking at, working with the wood in the whiskey, was drawing some of that citrus as well as the vanilla flavors out of that wood to really, you know, really complement some of the citrus drinks.
Yeah.
And so this cocktail, it has the citrus, it has the honey, it feels very summery, and this bourbon's perfect for that, right?
Yeah, it's a great bourbon for summertime. Like I said, it's 82.2 proof. It's a little lighter than some of our other whiskeys. It's 15% rye, so there's a little less spice. You know, like I said, an Old Forester Woodford Reserve is going to have a big, full mouthful. This is going to be a lot smoother on the finish, and like I said, very light. And we're launching it in only 8 markets, which are all in the South. So Alabama is obviously one of them. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and South Carolina. So having that very light whiskey, it's very approachable and very drinkable.
I think that the trend right now is for overproof whiskeys. You know, they can be really aggressive. And so this is a good thing to have. It sort of makes it a little bit, it isn't quite that, you know?
And we had one person comment and ask, what is the difference between bourbon and whiskey? Just as a refresher for everyone.
So a bourbon by definition has to go into a new charred white oak barrel. Has to be at least 50% corn. A whiskey can go into a used barrel. So that's why you see a lot of the Scotches, Irish whiskeys, Canadian whiskeys go into a used barrel versus new cooperage. But they can also add caramel coloring for their coloring, where bourbon has to get it all from that barrel.
And if people want to visit the Coopers Craft Distillery, is that possible right now?
The Coopers is actually distilled at our Kentucky distillery, which also distills Old Forester as well as early times bourbon. So they can visit that distillery, but there is no Coopers Craft. It's distilled the same places. And Chris Morris is the master distiller, who's been the master distiller on Woodford Reserve for years.
Would Coopers Craft be something that you would recommend for someone who is just starting to drink, or it's a good beginner?
I think it's a great entry-level bourbon because it is a little lighter, a little less proof. So somebody who, some of our other whiskeys would get offended if you called for a Coopers and Cola. This is something that's very approachable. It's got that vanilla, it's got some of the caramel flavors that are in a cola. So pulling it out, and then, or people who've been drinking bourbon with cola now that are going to taste it on the rocks or start drinking neat. This is something that's very, like I said, very approachable, very smooth in the finish. So yes, very much an entry level.
And I'm making an old-fashioned inspired cocktail with it later that plays on nutmeg and spice and things like that. I think the whiskey, it does well with that too.
Like I said, even though it's been a lighter proof, it is very flavorful, even though it is a smooth flavor.
And do you want to talk a little bit about the importance of bourbon in Southern culture and why it's so connected with the South?
Well, like I said, I'm no bourbon historian, but as far as, like I said, obviously being in Kentucky and Brown-Forman, the heritage of people coming over from Scotland and the limestone water and things like that, it started as a Southern heritage, shipping things in barrels, down the Mississippi, so into New Orleans, and where it could be distributed lower South, obviously helped, distribute it throughout the South.
Yes, I think there's also that mystique of like Prohibition and the South and the stills and things like that. And that's not really just a vodka thing, it's a bourbon thing.
And like some of the stuff from Prohibition and the bootlegging that went on, it was very much a Southern culture of moving the whiskey, from all over. Small distilleries existed for years.
And we have, Suzanne says that she would like to be considered Southern for this occasion. I think she wants to try one of the cocktails. I wish we could ship them to people via Facebook Live. Also, there's kind of been a resurgence of bourbon in the South and across the whole country. It's become very popular. Do you all want to speak to that a little bit?
You start on that.
Well, yeah, I think it is all over the place. I think there's a difference between having a bourbon from Kentucky and a bourbon from New York and a bourbon from California. Not to disparage them, but I mean there's something classic about a Kentucky bourbon.
And I think, like I said, there's been a focus on Southern culture and some of a migration of people in that direction that are very much spreading that Southern culture and spreading the appreciation of bourbon. And like I said, the classic cocktails coming back, whether it's an old fashioned like you talked about, or whether or a sour, that's been very fashionable. I think people are looking for authenticity in their drinks, and this is Coopers Craft is perfect for that. There's distillery, there's a cooperage, there's a story and the craftsmanship that goes with it, and that's what they're looking for in their cocktail. They want to be able to tell that story.
Yeah, and I think the more people that drink bourbon, the better.
Yeah. Why not?
We had one person that said that her doctor recommended it. So would you agree with that? I know you're no doctor.
Yeah, what bar does her doctor work at?
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, so they can feel free to reach out to our website, cooperscraft.com, or Brown-Forman's website, and you'll be able to reach us there.
And me, you can find me, we're opening up our own bar actually in Birmingham by the end of the year, so look for it.